John Adams was the second president of the USA from 1797 to 1801. Go ahead and in your notes, I want you to set up Cornell notes. You can take them however you need to. If you want to just draw the graphics, if you would like to write questions, you can write the questions after you have written down notes, forming a question and answering that using the notes I've given you. So let's look at John Adams, the second president of the United States. He only served one term as president. He was George Washington's vice president for 2 terms or 8 years. There were several events, two of which are kind of the landmark issues in John Adams' presidency. You have the XYZ affair and you have the Alien and Sedition Acts. We spent some time in class today working on this, and so I want you to make sure that you have all of this information filled out correctly. The Who. The Americans were Pinckney, Elbridge, and Gary, and the French were the agents X, Y, and Z. And I understand that I did spell the word French wrong, so go ahead and spell that correctly in your notes. The win, 1797, when Adams first took office. This was building up, and Adams took office kind of at the height of the issue. It occurred in France. It occurred basically because the French and the British were still at war, and the French were angry about the Americans not siding with the French due to the French helping the Americans in the American Revolution. And so, to show their anger towards the Americans, the French began taking or seizing American vessels and hoping to avoid war because America at this time period couldn't afford to be in any kind of a war or battle. We didn't have the military or the money or the economy to be able to support going into a war. And so Adams sent some delegates to hopefully talk it out and avoid having that war. Well, what happened was when the Americans got to France, they requested a meeting with the French Minister of Foreign Relations. Well, several weeks went by, and the Americans were treated in a very negative way. The Americans kept kind of getting the cold shoulder, and all of a sudden, these 3 French agents showed up and basically offered the Americans a bribe and said, "Hey, give us 10 million bucks and we'll stop stealing your vessels." And when the Americans asked about it, basically 250,000 or so of that was going to be given to the prime French Minister of Foreign Relations, and the agents were going to pocket the rest. So the issue here is basically that the French agents are now trying to bribe the Americans, and Pinckney basically came out and said millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. So this is something really important to remember. So when we talk about the XYZ affair, really the piece we need to know is millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. The Alien and Sedition Acts deal with John Adams having his feelings hurt, or the Federalist Congress having their feelings hurt. After the Alien and Sedition, or after the XYZ affair, the American press was publishing lots of negative articles against the Federalist Congress as well as John Adams. Well, to avoid this, Congress decided, well, we're not going to handle this, so we're going to pass several different acts or laws that restrict the press and the speech that is going on. One of those targeted aliens or immigrants who are not yet citizens, increasing wait time to apply for citizenship from 5 years, which is what we have today and we talked about earlier, to 14 years before you can even apply for citizenship. Another one was that the president could kick the alien or the person, the immigrant, out of the country during wartime if he wanted to. And the other piece was that the sedition piece is the void of being able to print opposition to the Federalist Congress or the presidents. So that's kind of what's going on in this situation where the Alien and Sedition Acts come about. In the next piece, Thomas Jefferson comes around, and when he becomes president, he basically pardons all of the aliens who were kicked out, and they refund all of the fines, and they kind of backtrack it all. So things to remember from John Adams' presidency. XYZ affair is millions for defense and not 1 cent for tribute. And Adams kept the U.S. out of war with France. That's a really big piece to remember. Not a lot happened during his presidency, but he did have the big piece of keeping the United States out of war with France.